Now this is a buckthorn thicket along a wood line that's bordered by grass. So typically what you will find is very dense buckthorn right along the edge of wood lines. This particular one is, I would classify as a thicket, which means that there's numerous plants in a small area. A lot of times you'll find buckthorn and it will be a little bit more spaced out, but here we've got one every square foot, maybe even more so. Most of them are big, an inch or less, but there's a lot of them in here. And through along this edge, there is some native, like right here we have some black cherry, but it's growing outwards because that's the only way it was able to compete. It should be growing straight. And this is one that you'd want to isolate and maybe train it up a little bit. However, what is through here is a very, very dense thicket of buckthorn. And what I'm looking at is a lot of times there's seeds you have to deal with, and those are the ones that are the biggest issue. If you don't have much time, you want to cut those out as quickly as possible. And yeah, this one is, it's good 15 feet tall in some areas, a lot of seeds, and those are just gonna be future generations. The only positive, it's going on the grass here and it'll be cut down. But a lot of times these thickets in the middle don't have as many seeds farther inwards, just for light and competition. But along the edges, they can tend to fruit at 5 feet. But you can see just the density of this one. Now this is about as bad as it gets. Just depends on the size of the area that is like this. This requires a lot of effort. However, the first thing you do is you do not attack it from this end right here, not from the front. You don't attack it directly like this, and you go from the back side and shave in, and eventually you can work on both sides a little bit better. Typically on the back end, it's not as dense. Now, in that mode of thought, is what you want to do is, like, this would be an area that you might not do right away. You always find areas that you can clean up very quickly, as large as possible. First, you don't attack this. When just maybe 100 feet down the road, you could clean up 10 times the amount of area in less time. So you have to find these pockets and clean them up and keep going from that. And that basically will require a multi-year effort. Unless you have a huge group or some financing that's able to do that, you're not going to be able to do large sections every year that you'd like to, but you can cover quite a bit of ground. The one thing we did do is, it looks like people are using, is that we cut a path right through the middle in the spring. So we can work on both sides a little bit right now. We cut it right down the middle, and now we can work on both sides and keep thinning it out. And you can see there's a little bit of a pile. This area you're gonna have to stack, just the density. But as you can see through here, it's dense, but you can walk through here. A lot of times there's different approaches to this. As you go one by one and you kill them, and do that. And you could do that, but this one I would just do another path through the middle first, both sides. So that way you break it down to maybe 6 pieces. That way you can easily work along the edges. Then you keep shaving it off, shaving it off. This is a small area, but another thing during the year I would do is cut out all the seeding ones as quickly as possible. Once you determine that they're seeding, you just kill them. Whether they have berries on them or not, it doesn't really matter at that point, because they've been seeding for many, many years. You're just gonna stop it. Next year they won't be seeding. So the one thing about buckthorn, you can't kill it year round. Is a lot of people say, oh, when it's flushing out, you should not do it. And I don't find that to be true. It just really depends how you deal with it. You can kill it year round. It's like, if you cut off the majority of it down to the ground, an inch or two to the ground, it's like it's going to be trying to suck in nutrients to reflush. So just that stress of it, it's like you've already half killed it. So give it a little bit of a kicker. It's like you have 100% kill. And another thing too is, at that time, is that that's when the female buckthorns are flowering. So when they're flowering, you can easily identify them from the males. They're very easy. The flower is very identifiable, and you can kill it at that time, so that way it doesn't have any berries that year, that particular plant. So that's one good thing, is like maybe at that time just sweep through and cut out all those flowering buckthorns and maybe do nothing else. And that way you can, in a particular area, don't go too expansive. I mean, basically break these areas down in 12-month sections and work from there. It's like, if you're not working in another area, it's like you're better off not going over there. I've had, like volunteers look, oh look, there's some over there, and they'll walk over. That's not an area we're not going to do for another year. And I mean, I don't say anything about it, but that's not very productive, because what happened in that case is, like, we do have a small patch of buckthorn that didn't get addressed that they could have killed at that time, but they went into another section. Regardless, so you can see, coming from this section, the density is not so great. The buckthorn are weaker. You can get to them. Another thing you can do outside of these roads, break them down in quadrants, is you could cut the canopies off just to really be able to open up. However, do not cut the canopies down if you're not going to come back that year. Maybe the next spring. If you're not going to do that, don't do it. But it's a useful tool, because you can chop the tops off very quickly versus bending over and messing around. Just chop, chop, chop. And then you can come back like later that year or early next year and finish up the job. And it's really easy. All of a sudden, even people that don't know what they're doing, you say, hey, they're the ones that are chopped in half, cut down. So there's some benefits to that. And the one thing, it does open up the canopy, so the light can hit the floor on the ground. Also, if there are some cedars that you're not sure about, it's like that'll eliminate that for that year. But that's a secondary approach. So always work in the areas that are less thick. Never attack that wall. You can see from here that that wall is just tons of buckthorn. I mean, it's about 8 foot thick, maybe 8 foot, 10, and just packed. Every square foot there's a buckthorn, maybe even more than one per square foot. Too much work, but you work from this angle, not the front. Now down the road is like, once you get like 3 feet in, you can just hit them from both ends. But initially, you don't even mess with that right away. Spend more time getting the larger areas complete. And also, if you have thickets, you definitely want to address those. Those are the worst things. However, don't spend all your time in the thickets if you have other areas that you can clean up quickly. Particularly, you'll see it as like, if you cut down an area and you spend couple hours there with a few people, and you can really open up a few thousand square feet, whereas here is like you're going to be bogged down. A few thousand square feet, it's going to take a while with the same amount of people. So if you're being bogged down here, or you clean up a lot more area, always clean up more area. Once those areas are cleaned up, you don't have to address them right away. You can let them sit for a year, and you can start addressing these. These thickets, I believe, are best to be addressed over time. First, open up the roadways, break it down into sections, stop the seed production, and then maybe cut off some of the canopy, and then come back a few weeks later and mess them around once you decide that you're going to fixate on this area. There's some natives here, a lot of choke cherries, and some black cherry, lindens, oaks. So it's a nice little structure. Underneath there's going to be some stuff too. We saw some spring ephemerals that were in here. But always go for the path of least resistance, and stopping the seed production first. Cover as much ground as you possibly can. And on these walls along these edges, is like they need to go away. But considering the time frame, those are the last things you do in a section. So you would clean out all this section first, and then you would address that wall, because that wall is maybe 1/10, not even, of this whole entire area. However, it's going to take up probably at least half your time, or maybe more. So clean up the 90% first, that way that's done, and then go after the little ones and keep thinning it out. And the roadways on these thickets are very good approach. You just break them down into quadrants, and that way you can work on both sides and keep shaving them off. Another factor of buckthorn is, don't have OCD. It's everywhere. Well, there's one, there's one, there's one. Oh my! No, you just keep at it, keep knocking them down. And if you do it for years, progressively an hour a week, that's a good rule for volunteers. They don't get so burned out. It's like over a period of a few years, you will see some substantial results. Now, as I was saying, buckthorn, kill it all year long if you can. And always go with the bigger ones first, the ones that cover the most ground, and then work your way down, down, down. And in that sense too, if the plant's not that big but it's got some berries on it, make sure you get that when you see it. And another big tool that you can have, a window of opportunity, is when those buckthorn are flowering. When they first start flowering is the prime time to hit the cedars. They're very noticeable. Nobody does that. I mean, we do that. We look around, oh, there's a cedar, there's there. We cut it down, you know, or even in an area we'll cut it in half, and then we'll come back and when we're going to clean it up that year. But we never cut anything in half unless we're going to clean it up in the next 6 months. But nobody goes through and go, oh yeah, we can kill the seeding buckthorn early in the season when they're flowering. That is a key window of opportunity. So the one other factor is learn to identify this stuff. Around here, there's the only things that look similar to it are prunus species, black cherry, choke cherry, some dogwoods. Occasionally you'll see some other things that might look like it, confuse you, but there's not a whole lot. And always just be cautious about that. Preserve anything that's native in the area. Occasionally you're going to chop something you shouldn't have chopped down, as long as it's not something that's really unique or rare. It's like, don't beat yourself up about it. Just try not to do it anymore. So buckthorn, if you keep cutting it down, it's not invincible, but it does require work. If you can get a few like-minded people and you go at it as a hobby week by week, the amount of areas that you can cover are substantial. But if nobody does anything, what's going to happen, the amount of areas that are dominated by buckthorn will just increase, and will create extinction zones even further.